How a Twitter account with a cat avatar took on Beijing. CNN. The unprecedented protests that swept China late last month, posing the biggest challenge to leader Xi Jinping's authority since he came to power, had a peculiar poker point, a Chinese Twitter account with a cat avatar. As people took to the street to call for greater freedoms and the end to zero COVID restrictions, the account teacher Lee is not your teacher live tweeted the demonstrations in real time, offering a rare window into just how quickly and widely the eruption of dissent reverberated across the country. Inside China, videos, photos, and accounts of the protest were swiftly censored online, but participants, witnesses, and others who knew how to scale the great firewall would send them to Teacher Li, which became a crucial source of information for people in China and beyond. Twitter, like many other social media platforms and news sites, is blocked in China, but it's accessible via a VPN. Behind the account is Li, a bespectacled 30-year-old painter who spent most of his working hours glued to the chair in front of the curved monitor and the pastel colored keyboard thousands of miles away from the protest in a living room corner in Italy. I haven't seen sunlight in what seems like a long time, Lee told CNN a week after the protest broke out. For days on end, he waded through an endless flood of private messages in his Twitter inbox sent by people across China with updates to share about the demonstrations and their aftermath. He posted them on their behalf, shielding the senders from the scrutiny of Chinese authorities. In recent years, Beijing has extended its crackdown on dissent to the foreign platform, detaining and jailing Chinese Twitter users who criticize the government. But through Li, these anonymous voices of dissent were converged and amplified. This account may become a symbol that Chinese people are still pursuing freedom of speech, Li said. When you post something within China, it will quickly disappear. This account can then document all these historical events and moments that cannot be saved inside the country. Li's Twitter pages has gained 80, 800,000 followers in the matter of weeks. Li received thousands of submissions a day and up to dozens per second at the height of the protest. His following quadrupled in 2 weeks to more than 800,000. Journalists, observers, and activists monitored his feed closely, and some of his posts are aired on televisions across the world. I didn't have the time to react at all. My only thought at the time was to document what was happening, Lee said. The influence is beyond my imagination. I didn't expect billions of clicks on my feed in such a short period of time. As his profile grew, Li caught the attention of the Chinese authorities as the scrutiny apparatus went after the protesters in China with a sweeping campaign of surveillance, intimidation, and detention. Li also came into their crosshairs. Last Saturday, Li was tweeting away when he received the insider's phone call from his parents back home in eastern China. They had just had another visit from the police, they told him. As soon as I started to update Twitter, they called my parents to tell me to stop posting. And then they went to our house at midnight to harass my parents, Lee said. It was their second police visit of the day. In the morning, a local police chief and a handful of officers had already called it on Lee's parents. They accused Lee of attacking the state and the Communist Party and presented a list of his tweeted as criminal evidence. They wanted to know if there were any foreign forces behind me, whether I received any money or paid people money from their submissions, Lee said. Lee told his parents he wasn't working for anyone and no money was involved. His parents, his father pleaded for him to pull back from the brink and stop posting. I can't turn back now. Please don't worry about me, Lee told him. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. You're an artist. You shouldn't touch politics, his father said. Lee spends most of his working hours in front of the computer, taking breaks, only to feed their four cats. Elephant in the room. Lee's father knew what it was like to be on the wrong side of the politics. Born to a nationalist army officer in 1949, he was persecuted as the counter-revolutionary growing up under Mao Zedong's tumultuous reign. In his adolescence, he could no longer stand the torment and fled to the hills in southern China, where he found work in the factory. In the latter half of the Cultural Revolution, which swept China in the 1960s and 1970s, Lee's father was enrolled into a college as the worker peasant soldier. Students admitted not on academic merit but class background and stayed after graduation to work as an art teacher. Since the brutal crackdown on the Tiananmen pro-democracy protest in 1989, "Don't touch politics" has become a mantra for the generation of Chinese. As the country pivoted his focus to economic growth, un, un, unspoken social contract was struck that people would give up political freedoms for stability, material comfort, and freedoms in their private lives. But under leadership, that implicit deal is looking increasingly precarious. His zero COVID policy has shuttled the businesses, hampered the economic growth, and pushed the youth unemployment to record levels. His authoritarian agenda has expanded censorship, tightened ideological control, and squeezed personal freedoms to the extent unseen in decades. Chinese people are not keen on politics, but politics is constantly intruding into their lives. They assume there is an elephant in the room, but the elephant is gradually growing bigger and squeezing everyone's living space, Lee said. That's why we are seeing the explosion of dissent now. In China's largest cities, from the eastern financial hub of Shanghai to the capital Beijing, the southern metropolis of Guangzhou and Chengdu in the west, political demands are chanted along with the slogans against COVID tests and lockdowns. Many young people held a sheet of white paper in the symbolic protest against censorship, demanding the government to give them back the freedom of speech, the press, movies, books, and art. Their calls resonated deeply with Lee, who grew up learning how to paint and watching foreign cartoons and films. He has the toy Yoda from Star Wars on a shelf next to his chair. During an era when China seemed freer and more open to the world, Now all the movies showing in the cinema are patriotic films. Countless songs have been taken down from music platforms, and many artwork are censored as soon as they've been created, he said. If you came from that relatively free era and look at the way things are now, we will find it very sad. From Weibo to Twitter, Lee said he did not seek out politics. Instead, like many young Chinese who took to the streets, he was unwittingly swept up by political current. He described himself as someone who had been pushed along by the tides chosen by history by chance to document an important chapter of it. I was someone who painted and scribbled cring, cring, cringy love stories. He wrote in a statement addressed to Chinese officials on November 28th, after police paid their first visit to his parish. All of this is supposed to be far away from me, but you, with your control of speech, made me who I am. Lee would not even have been on Twitter, let alone be one of its most influential Chinese language users, if censorship hadn't become so suffocating on Weibo, China's own Twitter-like platform. Lee was among the earliest users of Weibo, dating back to 2010. I was lucky to have witnessed that era. It was, in fact, pretty free, he said. There were intellectuals, lawyers, and journalists, and other influential commentators led critical discussions on social issues, sometimes issuing scathing criticism or ridicule of officers. From the internet, Lee learned about human rights lawyer Pu Chi Quang and dissident artist Ai Weiwei, which, among other things, gradually shifted his political views. Lee called his younger self a little pink, a somewhat derogatory term for China's young and fierce nationalist. He used to find stories about his father's tormented youth hard to believe. Our country is so strong and powerful. How could these kinds of bad things happen? He recalled himself asking. By 2012, Lee had become more critical of society. At 19 years old, the budding artist held his first personal exhibition at the gallery in the eastern city of Jin'an. He named it Picasso in the Circus, meant to mock this absurd society, which is like a circus filled with funny animals, according to the introduction of the event. The relative freedom on Chinese social media was fleeting. Censorship started to tighten before Xi came to power, and clamped down on free speech, and outspoken commentators only escalated. Many of the influential accounts Li had followed are banned, and some of their owners jailed. Things got even worse during the pandemic. On Weibo, countless accounts were banned for speaking out on the variety of issues, from the feminism to the human cost of the zero COVID. Earlier this year, Li lost 52 accounts in the span of 2 months. My account would survive for about 4 or 5 hours, with the shortest record being 10 minutes, Lee said. I treated it as the performance art. He lost his last Weibo account by retweeting a photograph of the 15-year-old Uyghur girl in detention who was featured in the BBC's investigation on the Xinjiang police file. I wanted to be brave for once for her. It was well worth it, he said on Twitter. Having seen her face, I would be able to fall asleep tonight if I just sit by and not retreat it. Lee moved to Italy in 2016 to study art. After exhausting all the means to create a new account, Lee switched to Twitter. It felt liberating because you no longer need to use the acronym, ac- acronyms or code names, he said. On Chinese social media, people have become accustomed to speaking on coded language to avoid censorship. ZF means the government, ZY means freedom, and the most sensitive term of all, the name Xi Jinping, can never be mentioned without triggering censorship or worse repercussions. Some internet users have been taken in for questioning by police for sharing memes or jokes about Xi in group chat. Instead, the top leader is often referred to simply as him or that man. And so, on November 26th, when Lee saw in his Twitter inbox a video showing crowds opening chanting Xi Jinping step down on the streets of Shanghai under the close watch of police, he was doom, dumbfounded. We can't even discuss him on the internet. It is beyond everyone's imagination that such a slogan would be shouted out on Urumqi Road, Lee said, referring to the site of the Shanghai protest. I'm a little embarrassed to tell you that I froze for a second when I heard the slogan, but I told myself that if they dare to shout it, I should be brave enough to document it. So I wrote it out word by word in a Twitter post, he said. Backlash and regret. Among the thousands of direct messages Lee received in his inbox are death threat. I get a lot of anonymous harassment saying I know who you are, where you live, and I will kill you, he said. He ignored them and straight focused on processing updates on the protest. But when he stepped away from his computer, the dark thought would come back to haunt him. This threat, as well as the police harassment of his parent, weighing heavily on Lee's mind, but he is determined to carry on. This account is more important than my life, he said. I will not shut it down. I've already arranged it for everyone else, for someone else to take over if something bad happens to me. By the first week of December, the demonstrations had largely petered out. Some protesters received phone calls from the police warning them against taking to the street again. Others are taken away for questioning, and some remained in detention. In a major victory for the protesters, China announced on Wednesday a dramatic overhaul of its pandemic policy, scrapping some of the most onerous restrictions in the clearest sign yet. The government is moving away from the draconian zero COVID policy. COVID testing booths, health code scanning signs, and the lockdown barriers are being removed at startling speed across the country. But like many protesters, Lee will have to continue to face the consequences of his political defiance, likely for the rest of his life. He has not returned home to his parents since 2019 due to China's border restrictions and the skyrocketing prices of plane tickets. The easing of domestic COVID measures has raised the hope that China is a step closer to opening its borders, but Lee may never be able to go home again. When I saw people taking to the street and holding up pieces of white paper, I knew I had to sacrifice something of myself too, he said. I mentally prepared, even if authorities won't let me see my parents again. Looking back, Lee said he found it absurd that China's stringent censorship of the press and the internet has made him a painter as far away as Italy, a key documenter of the country's most widespread protest in decades. In the heat of the moment, he didn't have the time to mull over whether it was all worth it. He knows his life's path is going to be changed forever, but finds console in the fact that some of the protesters' demands are met. I don't think I'm a hero. Those who take the street, they are the real heroes, he said. Lee's Twitter profile image is the doodle of his tabby cat. Now Lee has only one regret, that his Twitter name and handle were not chosen thought thoughtfully enough. If our county is to leave a mark in history, I should have a serious name, he said. His Twitter name is the self-mockery of his own accent. The people from his home province cannot differentiate the pronunciations of Lee, his surname, and Ni, meaning you, and his Twitter handle is a big dig at Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian's comment last year that foreign reporters should to Zeli or chuckle to themselves for being able to live safely in China during the pandemic. The praise has since been used widely on Chinese social media in this sarcastic way to criticize zero COVID. But Lee is extremely proud of his Twitter about the doodle of his tabby cat. The cat is now known to the Chinese diaspora around the world, but at the same time, it has also become the most dangerous cat on the Chinese internet, he said.